is saying what you don't know. And the fact is, there's a lot we don't know about the death of Michael Reinell, the man who killed a member of Patriot Prayer last week.
I had no choice.
What we do know is a lot more about what Patriot Prayer stands for after talking to a guy who studies right-wing extremists.
I certainly think white supremacists are among them.
And we asked mayoral candidate Sarah Iannarone one of the questions we keep hearing from you.
What is your association with the Antifa movement?
Here's the story.
And I'm Dan Haggerty. Hello, welcome to The Story. You made it to the end of another week. We even get a holiday weekend as a reward, but remember, we haven't exactly done great with holiday weekends this year, namely 4th of July, Memorial Day, Mother's Day. Don't forget, we're still in a pandemic. Like I needed to remind you, we still need to limit our contact with the outside world to fight back against this thing. So as much as you want to go out and have a great Labor Day, first think about where you want to be next Labor Day, out and about, right? Or still cooped up fighting this once-in-a-generation virus. I think I know what I'd pick. Meanwhile, let's start talking about, well, first, before we get to the meat and potatoes of tonight's big story, how about we have some vegetables first? By now, I'm sure that you have heard all the details on the death of Michael Reinell, at least what's being reported at this point. He is the guy, of course, who admitted to shooting Jay Danielson and killing him, a member of the right-wing group Patriot Prayer, last Thursday night during a Trump rally in downtown Portland. He made that admission in a pre-recorded interview with Vice News last night, and then, man, things happened really fast. Portland police issued a warrant for his arrest. A federal task force tracked him down to Lacey, Washington, and Reinell died while officers moved in to arrest him. There. That is kind of the hard facts only version of what happened last night in Thurston County. And if it feels like something's missing, it's because there are things missing, like a lot of the details about how it all unfolded and how he died exactly. That's because right now there are kind of a bunch of stories about exactly what happened. U.S. Marshals, for instance, say members of the task force there shot and killed Reinell because he had a gun and was threatening officers. The Olympian newspaper talked to witnesses who say Reinell actually shot at officers and then they shot back and killed him. And then there's what we heard from the Thurston County Sheriff's Office last night, hours after it all went down.
The information that we have is that he was armed. I have not confirmed that yet at this point. That it's, again, very preliminary into our investigation, and I do not know whether or not the subject actually fired at law enforcement in this case.
So we got the gist, though, from police, right? But not the details, at least not yet. Now, as far as what we've heard from Reinell, I mean, who really knows what to believe? In this interview he did with Vice News, he told them that he served in the military. But NPR did some research. They tried to look that up. They couldn't find any record of his service. He also told Vice that he was not a member of Antifa, but he's done interviews in the past where he said that he was. He also said that he fired in self-defense last Saturday, but other witnesses dispute that. We did get a look at some court documents today that tell us what police learned that night. Witnesses telling police that Reinell had ducked behind a parking garage as Danielson was passing by. Then he came out behind him. The two men exchanged words. According to witnesses, Danielson sprayed bear spray at Reinell, who immediately shot him. But now, both of those guys, Reinell and Danielson, are gone. Portland police are still investigating. We know that. But questions about that night won't be answered as thoroughly as they would have been if Reinell would have turned himself in and stood trial. All right, let's talk big story tonight. And I'm going to talk about two of the names that I just mentioned before. Not people exactly, but groups. Patriot Prayer and Antifa. I know that you've heard of them, and you've certainly seen what can happen when these groups meet on the streets of Portland. It's a rival left and right-wing group. They've been known to enter battle literally with each other when one stages a rally. The other one meets them there. We've seen this happen many times, but I think it's important to finally kind of have a conversation about what these groups believe. Patriot Prayer is led by its founder, this man, that's Joey Gibson. They say they advocate for free speech and oppose big government, while Antifa is often described as a leaderless group with its purpose is stated right in its name, Antifa, anti-fascism. But it's clear that those self-descriptions don't really go far enough, do they? And their roles in ongoing protests are way more complicated than anti-fascism and free speech. Luckily for us, I know a man named Dr. Alexander Reed Ross at Portland State University who studies groups like these, and he gave me some of his time today.
So you have politicians describing the Patriot Prayer or the Proud Boys as they are white nationalists, or they are a terrorist group, or they are a militia. You kind of are refraining from painting any of them with broad strokes, probably because of how deeply you understand the details of these organizations. But if you were to ascribe a broad stroke to these types of people, for folks sitting at home, how would you?
I think that they're more or less radical right in ideology and creed, which generally means that while they're not anti-democracy, they're hostile to democracy. And they're hostile to democratic institutions and to liberals, but especially to the left.
I've been hearing a lot when it comes to Antifa that they are what you would describe as, not you specifically, but what people would describe as a leaderless movement. Would you agree with that, with that term to describe them?
Leaderless, I would say definitely. I think at this point, like, defining Antifa is maybe a little bit difficult. I think that by this point, it's like a broad social movement. And social movements tend not to have leaders unless they're like populists who dog whistle to people like that. I think in this context, Antifa is more of a leaderless, complex, and adaptive movement.
Now, after we recorded that interview, we learned that Facebook and Instagram have both removed Patriot Prayer's pages on their platforms. They said that they fell into the dangerous individuals and organizations category. Now, Joey Gibson said that he's going to take legal action into this, or at least look into that. Now, while Antifa doesn't have a leader like Joey Gibson, it does have some supporters in high places, including Portland mayoral candidate Sarah Iannarone. During my interview with her yesterday, I read her some of the questions that I've been getting from viewers about how far her support for Antifa goes.
I'm going to refer to some comments here from Facebook, and I'm also going to put a little asterisk. These are not comments from Facebook are not where anybody should go for the specific definitions of how the world works. But these are comments that have been posted under things you have said specifically on your Facebook page, things that have been said on mine as I mentioned that I was interviewing you today, things that people have written on other interviews you have done from various media outlets here in Portland. And I want to read them because they always kind of fit the same narrative. And this isn't accusatory at all, but I think that you should respond to them considering I read it so often. And I just kind of want people to be able to hear what you have to say about it and be able to put it to bed here. So Tony White said, in an earlier interview, she, as in you, said that she wasn't the person lighting the fires and wouldn't condemn them. Really? ? Then Raymond Saperstein said, I have read that she is 100% Antifa. Linda Troop wrote, what is your association with the Antifa movement? And I'm going to read between the lines a little bit on those. I don't think that they're describing the simple stance against fascism, which is something that I think we should all endorse, but rather the people who are setting the fires, brawling in the streets with the Proud Boys, and committing other types of violent acts. Can you speak at all to these comments that I've seen time and time again under anything you say online?
Thanks for the opportunity to do that. If I tried to reply to them all individually, it would take me months, if not years. I condemn violence. I believe that violence is bad no matter who's doing it. And what I said was I understand that the people perpetrating that were angry, and rightfully so, and that I also saw that the Portland police were engaged in their own violence. But let's talk about Antifa sometimes, because I have said that I am anti-fascist, but I don't want to undermine the fact that we have a bumper sticker on my campaign that says, everyday anti-fascist always. If you talk to our elders who were there for World War II, fascism is bad. I mean, being opposed to fascism should not be something that people shy away from in 2020. When we look at Trump sending unaccountable forces here who were scooping up people into vans, that is something to be scared of. And so when I say something like everyday anti-fascist, what that means to me is that every Portlander should come together to oppose bigotry and hate and exclusion and violence in our city. And even putting this into practice, I've put it into practice in very nonviolent ways. Last August, when we had the incursion of white nationalists from outside our city come in to incite riots and wreak havoc here, We did something called Tamp Out Hate on my campaign because we looked at the toxic masculinity that was driving a lot of this anger and rage that we see on display. And we collected menstrual products, and then we distributed thousands of them to homeless shelters around the city. To me, that's what anti-fascism is. It's the kind community organizing that says hate is not welcome here, that a strong, cohesive community is ultimately our first responder in times of disaster, that when the going gets tough, we are there for each other. And the way that this has been weaponized against people like me, I think is indicative of what Trump begets in our society right now. And I agree with Mayor Wheeler that Trump is amplifying violence and making it unnecessarily worse. But to call anti-fascism something a terrorist organization, it's just not true. And if you look at pictures of me or you search that hashtag,
I think that they're also referring to maybe your unwillingness to be critical of a group that has kind of co-opted that anti-fascist movement, or at least are willing to use violent means in order to uphold those same beliefs.
When we look at the history of white nationalism, when we look at the KKK even, and when you look at law enforcement's historic sympathizing, if you will, with white supremacy in the United States, what you have people saying is that we are not going to tolerate that kind of violence here. And they're responding to that. If there were no people who were white supremacists, if there were no white nationalist agitators, if there weren't this new KKK who were coming to be racist against Black Portlanders, who were anti-Semitic, right, against our Jewish community, they would be home growing tomatoes and microbrewing, right, beers. It's not, these people are not in this for fun. They're in this because they care about community, and ultimately they want people to be safe too, is my understanding of where they're coming from when they talk about why they're doing what they're doing.
All right, if you missed any of my conversation with Sarah Iannarone, there's a big chunk of it for you. We just played, but you can watch the whole thing. We spoke for 47 minutes, I think. It's on the KGW YouTube channel right now. While you're there, hopefully hit that subscribe button and check out some of the other interesting stuff that we have on our YouTube channel. Now, close watchers of the story might have noticed I've been talking to Sarah Iannarone a lot during her campaign for during this mayoral race. 3 times exactly I've talked to her, and each interview has been roughly an hour. So that's roughly 3 hours spent with her, getting to know her and her policies, and helping you make a decision this November about who you vote for. Notably absent from the story is a conversation with Mayor Ted Wheeler. We have been reaching out and trying to set up a one-on-one, but so far it hasn't happened. I mean, what could he possibly be doing that's more important than my little TV show here? I can tell you that his office got back to us today, and they're going to try and give us some time next week. So hopefully we can keep that on the books and keep that scheduled. Obviously, he is a very busy guy during a rocky time in a city notoriously tricky to govern. But it is high time that we had a chat. I mean, the mayor and I barely know each other. In fact, we've only crossed paths once, to my knowledge, and we had to dip into our archives just to find it. But we did.
It is my pleasure now to introduce and bring to the stage our mayor of the city of Portland, Ted Wheeler.
All right, good evening, everybody. We are fortunate tonight. We have the most beautiful Portland weather, and you're sharing it with 25,000 of your best friends.
You couldn't hear, but as we passed, I said, "Hi, Mr. Mayor." So that's about what we've done so far. Do you remember when you could be shoulder to shoulder with 25,000 of your best friends? Wasn't that nice? That was November 29th, 2019, Pioneer Courthouse Square. See, Mr. Mayor, we go way back, and I hope to hear from you real soon.
There's already been much ado about voting this year, and ballots haven't even gone out yet. But is it possible to, send them out early? Just in case. And keeping Portland weird by giving yourself over to absolute pleasure, even during a pandemic.
I see you shiver with anticipation.
When the story continues.
Welcome back to the story. I don't know if you heard my call yesterday. I put out this call for action about music for our show. Our music is really divisive for some reason. You can kind of hear in the background right now. But what isn't divisive nowadays? People either love it or they hate it. So I put out this call to folks to send us some of their music, the musicians out there. I want to hear what you got. We want to try it on for size. We'll give you a big shout out. We'll play some of your stuff. We'll try to have a lot of fun with it. So we already got a couple of submissions already, but we want even more. So please send them in to us using the hashtag HeyDan. You can email us at thestory@kgw.com, or, just DM me on Facebook or Instagram. Anyway, come knock on the door. I'll answer it. Let's see what you got. All right, let's get back to the news here for a minute. We actually got an update on a story from a little earlier this week. It's about people who found they couldn't access money in their Chase bank accounts because the company flagged them. And if you're out of work right now, you're going to want to listen to this, because Kristen Severance found out that the only thing these people did to get locked out was deposit their unemployment checks.
We first told you about Karen Crater's story on Wednesday. She and her family had no access to their own money until I contacted Chase. Chase is freezing or closing accounts due to a massive unemployment imposter fraud, where scammers are stealing millions of dollars in unemployment benefits. But I learned Oregonians legitimately receiving unemployment are getting caught up in this too and being blocked from their money.
When you saw Karen's story, what went through your mind?
It was like reading what happened to me, exactly what happened to me.
Amber Purcell couldn't access her money in her Chase bank account for 3 months.
All my unemployment checks had only gone to that bank account. So then they have said, well, we're investigating the unemployment.
Tough for anyone, especially because she takes care of her 3-year-old nephew.
And I had called multiple times and I was like, there's a 3-year-old involved, like to buy food for, diaper, like whatever I have to buy for him. And you guys are like taking from him. And no one cared.
Ridiculous that it's already happening to more people.
Leandro Garduno has no access to the money in his Chase account either.
I don't know the reason. They just said that the government tagged my checks as fraud and they restricted my account.
He had applied for unemployment in March and received all 12 checks at once. He thought the bank may have flagged his account because he deposited all the checks at the same time.
And I thought that was the reason. And then it turns out other people have gotten their account shut down, even depositing one check.
Both Amber and Leandro contacted me after seeing Karen Crater's story. Karen was locked out of her account for days over unemployment fraud concerns.
I feel as though Chase is treating us like criminals, and we are not criminals.
All 3 people said they received the runaround from Chase when trying to get answers and access to their money. We knew this was happening in Washington. The unemployment claims for nearly 200,000 Washington workers had been flagged over the summer after that massive unemployment imposter scheme. Several Chase customers reported being locked out of their accounts too. Both Chase and the state of Washington said they were investigating. Between $550 million to $650 million has been lost in this unemployment imposter scam so far. After we alerted the Oregon Employment Department that these problems were now happening in Oregon, they reached out to the Chase Fraud Department. The Oregon Employment Department told me the OED checks are being flagged as fraud by a Chase bank algorithm due to the high number of people cashing or depositing their unemployment. OED said they'll do their best to help people with this problem.
If you could say something to Chase Bank, what would you say?
I don't think you want to know what I would say. And I'm going 3 months without my money because why? I said, what if this happened to you? Would you just sit back and not say anything?
I reached out to Chase Bank. A spokesperson told me, as reported, the government is investigating potential fraud relating to unemployment insurance benefits. To protect us, our customers, or to meet legal requirements, we have restricted some accounts pending further review. They are looking into these new complaints. We'll keep you posted.
Now, earlier this week on the story, we broke down exactly how the Electoral College works and why we use it to pick the president. If you missed it, you need a little civics refresher. You can check it out on the KGW YouTube page. Now, I got this question about it on Twitter, though. Hey, Dan, what I'd like you to do is explain what happens when no candidate reaches a majority of the electoral votes. My recollection, U.S. House of Representatives picks president and Senate picks VP. You are correct. If no candidate gets a majority of the electoral votes, or if they tie, then the House of Representatives picks the president, the Senate picks the vice president. In the House, each state delegation gets 1 vote, and a candidate must win a majority. So right now, that means 26 out of the 50 votes. This has happened a couple of times throughout history. First, course, during the election of 1800. If you've seen Hamilton, you might be familiar with what happened. Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr tied in the Electoral College. The House had to pick between the two in a rap battle, but they were so divided that it actually took 36 ballots before a winner was decided, who ultimately, of course, was Jefferson. Then in 1824, Andrew Jackson received the most electoral votes, but not a majority because 3 other candidates were also running, including John Quincy Adams. After one of the other candidates decided to endorse Adams, he was picked by the House and became president. Jackson was elected president 4 years later. Now, that was almost 200 years ago, and it hasn't happened since, but I should point out it is still completely possible for President Trump and Joe Biden to tie in the Electoral College. There's 538 votes total, so they could potentially each get 269. The map on your screen right now just shows one possible tie outcome out of a lot of different combinations. And considering how 2020 has gone so far, would you really be shocked if it happened? All right, now here's another election question from Judy. North Carolina is already mailing out ballots. Why can't we? I learned from the voting department that it has to come from the legislature. So I contacted them and heard back that a special session has to be called by Governor Crate Brown in order for us to do that. So first of all, we should probably hire you for our research team because you nailed it. You're exactly right. And North Carolina did start mailing out ballots today, and other states will start doing that over the next few weeks. But that is because this is the first year for a lot of these states to actually do vote by mail due to the pandemic, and they want to get a head start on everything since they've never really dealt with this sort of thing before. Now, here in Oregon, this is old hat. We've been doing vote by mail for decades. We actually have a law about when ballots get mailed out. It says the county clerk shall mail by non-forwardable mail an official ballot with a return identification envelope and a secrecy envelope not sooner than the 20th day before the date of an election and not later than the 14th day before the date of the election. You got all that? So what that means is that you won't get your ballot until mid-October. Now to the part of your question about the legislature. Since that's actually a law, it would be up to lawmakers to change it to allow ballots to go out earlier. And since the legislature isn't in session right now, it would mean that the governor would have to call a special session, but we haven't heard that she has any plans to do that. And like I said before, Oregon is a pro at mail-in voting, so even though you won't get to vote 2 months early like people in other states, you can still vote a few weeks early when you get your ballots next month. All right, we're taking some questions and comments after the break. Send them our way using the hashtag HeyDan. You can also email the story at kgw.com. Plus, we're keeping Portland weird with a tradition that even COVID couldn't interrupt. Even after 42 years, how the Clinton Street Theater is still doing the time warp when we finish the story. The Clinton Street Theater has been doing the time warp for 42 years straight. And this weekend it is keeping Portland weird by keeping the tradition alive by playing the Rocky Horror Picture Show every single week, even during the pandemic. Every Saturday at midnight since 1978. Think about that. You could come to the Clinton for a showing, armed with your bread, squirt guns, and Scott brand paper towels. You might ask, how has it kept it going all of this time while theaters across the country especially have been shut down? Well, according to the Willamette Week, the Clinton has been hosting some private parties of 10 or fewer people, so staying within guidelines. And when there aren't any of those people there, MC Nathan Williams enjoys a viewing by himself or with a close couple of friends, just to keep that tradition alive. Well done. And it's nice to know that some traditions are able to keep going despite everything that we're going through right now. So what a week. It's been a really long one. I think we all have to process it, you know, and a lot of the stories that we've been talking about this week, if you watch us here in the story, you know, we don't just tell them one day and stop. I mean, we're going to continue to dig into these things, try to build context around them, and talk about them next week as well. So make sure you're part of that conversation, reaching out and using the hashtag HeyDan. Just a light little comment from Lee Anderson. Hey, Dan, you're looking a bit gray around the edges. Maybe it's the camera angle or the lighting. That's exactly what it is. These cameras, man. They'll gray you out. I don't know what the deal is. I keep telling my wife maybe I do a little Just for Men, but I'll just ruin it. Is it too late? Would you guys notice? It's subtly just, I'm gonna think about it. Talk to you next week. Have a good weekend. Enjoy the holiday.